This is StoryRobot. Welcome to r/RegularRevenge. Our story of today is screwing over employees, bullying a pregnant woman, and running an unsanitary restaurant. Have fun paying me $2,300. In 2018, I worked for a very small business owned by a wealthy couple from a Western European country. They had 3 employees total, including myself, at the time I started. The job was easy and straightforward at first, but there were some red flags early on. The position started off with 2 weeks as a training period, during which I would work with another person. After that 2 weeks, I'd work shifts on my own on weekdays and with one other person on weekends. This meant that employees couldn't have normal lunches or breaks, which goes against our state's labor laws. I never signed a waiver for this, and it wasn't clear that I couldn't take my lunch breaks when I started. They had gluten-free options and heavily advertised this on social media. Any other establishment in our state would have adhered to strict sanitation requirements to avoid cross-contamination, but these people were shockingly relaxed. They never asked me for a copy of my food handler's license before training me to cook, and they instructed me to clean the entire shop with rags and plain water. No separate cooking surface or utensils for gluten-free menu items. A few weeks into my hiring, they purchased jugs of sanitizer and explained that they were expecting an inspector from the health department. They instructed me to not use the sanitizer because using it regularly was too expensive, but to keep it visible and lie to the health inspector about our sanitation practices. From there, things only got shadier. I received a flat $40 minus $80 in tips with each paycheck. However, the rounded to the nearest $5 increments of tips seemed suspiciously low. When I worked register, I saw hundreds of dollars in card tips and knew they could have only be split by myself and 2 other people. We should have been making that bi-weekly figure per person in one day if it was busy. The owner got abnormally upset if my coworker and I split our tips at the end of each shift. The owner knew about things like that, because he installed surveillance cameras shortly after I was hired. He watched it at all hours of the day, often monitoring the shop from his car in the nearby parking lot. Soon, I started getting reprimanded regularly for going against the early red flags. If he saw me eating lunch, he told me that he didn't care if I ate, but I'd better look ready to cook if a customer walked by. I'd have to stay at the register, but not let anyone see me eat. I'd often go days without eating more than 1 meal because my hours were so long and I never got more than a minute to put anything in my face. If he saw me using the sanitizer, he'd insist that I was wasting his money. I told him that I felt concerned using the same cooking utensils for gluten-free dishes as I did for dishes that contained gluten. I felt that since so many of our customers had gluten sensitivities, allergies, it was only a matter of time until someone got sick. He told me that he had been operating this way for over a year and nobody ever got sick, so there's no point in worrying about it. I noticed my tips were about $10 less than usual that pay period. Additionally, the owner expected us to cook for customers if we were still physically present in the shop, no matter where we were in our closing procedures. We were never to turn anyone down, but we wouldn't be paid overtime if closing took longer as a result. We also weren't allowed to start any of the closing procedures early because he didn't want customers to think we were closed, even if we were. Eventually, one of the other employees announced she was pregnant. As her pregnancy progressed, her ability to carry out a lot of her responsibilities diminished. It was medically necessary for her to cease heavy lifting, to be able to sit down, and to have access to her breaks and lunches to get her proper nutrition. The owner reprimanded her for these things and told her that he expected her to operate at her pre-pregnancy capacity. He added that she shouldn't let pregnancy make her lazy, and that if she didn't remain active and she let herself eat all the time, her baby would come out fat, like her. She tried to call out sick once, too. She had to rush to the hospital because she was experiencing abnormalities in her pregnancy and thought she might have been miscarrying. She and the baby turned out to be fine, but the owner yelled at her for missing her shift and told her that he didn't care if she miscarried. Her responsibility was to him first. She ended up quitting, but remained friends with them, I don't know why. The owner's wife wrote passive-aggressive notes explaining that they were always watching us during our shifts and that they would start deducting our tips if we made any mistakes. If we made a mistake from cooking resulting in us wasting ingredients, it would come from our tips. If we broke an item in the inventory, it would come out of our tips. If we took too long to finish closing duties, still no overtime, and it would come out of our tips. It became more and more obvious that the owners included themselves in the tip pool, which is also illegal in our state. I was the only employee at the time who didn't feel threatened by these people. My other coworker was an illegal immigrant from the same country as the owners. They treated her like beep and she didn't feel like she could do or say anything about it because they repeatedly and falsely told her that she had no rights. They gaslighted her into thinking that they were so nice, to hire her when no one else would. She felt like she had to work for them and she had to do whatever they told her to do because if she didn't, she'd lose her only source of income with no guarantee of another one. If anyone confronted the owners about any of their violations, they'd acted shocked and insist that they were so new to the country that they don't know any of the laws yet. Any of their general bipolarity was a cultural difference. They relied on these two defenses so much that they never bothered to actually protect themselves from a legal standpoint. I already knew I wanted to quit and that I wanted to alert local authorities to all their violations, but the final straw for me was when they cut my pay for making mistakes while I was exhausted and processing personal trauma. They made me sign a contract agreeing to the cut, but applied it retroactively to the pay period before the contract was signed. While it beeped not getting that extra money, I laughed for 20 minutes straight when I put together my pay stub and my copy of the contract. They basically offered themselves up on a silver platter because of their own incompetence. I documented everything I could. Because everything was so hilariously illegal, I had compiled a thick portfolio of evidence in no time and filed a wage complaint at the same time I handed in my 2 weeks' notice. Once they knew about the wage complaint, they started a campaign of slander against me, which made me lose my next job. I didn't have hard evidence of that, so I let it go and applied somewhere else. The stolen tips really screwed up my taxes. My former bosses reported my actual tips to the IRS, but kept me in the dark about the figure and gave me so much less that I ended up owing the IRS $400 more than what I expected. I spent the time between my employment with them and the hearing with the labor commissioner at the Department of Labor working alone on my case. On the day of the hearing, my former bosses brought their immigration lawyer and a stranger they paid off to act like they were my coworker who had no idea why I filed a complaint against them in the first place. All the evidence he presented against me had nothing to do with my claims of not getting paid overtime, not getting my meal breaks, and having my tips stolen. It was all just fake letters, from fake people with awful Mary Sue OC type names. All the documents he presented could have been typed up the night before. It was so bad. Their defense relied heavily on slander, too. Who would you trust? Me, a straight-A university student at a prestigious school? Or her, an uneducated lowlife with an entry-level job? Every time I presented hard evidence to the labor commissioner, the lawyer scrambled to come up with an explanation for why I was lying, but failed miserably. When I showed the labor commissioner my contract informing me of the pay cut with the pay stub reflecting a retroactive cut, the lawyer still didn't understand what was happening. Their defense absolutely crumbled and the labor commissioner poked several holes in their stories. Fast forward to about a year later. I received a $2,300 check in the mail, which meant that I was awarded every penny due to me. What made this even sweeter for me was the date on the check. It was the same as the start of our city's stay-at-home order due to the pandemic. Not only are they losing money due to decreased business as a result of COVID-19, but they were legally required to pay me out at the same time. I won't be surprised if they don't survive the economic impact, but unlike the vast majority of small business in my area, they actually deserve it. Revenge is sweet and karma is a beep. Thank you for watching. Error. Problem detected. Not enough subscribers. Please subscribe, like and comment.